What is up, 80s Revolution subscribers and fans and friends and followers and crew members? It is nice to see you all again. I don't see any of you, but you know what I mean. We are back for another video. As always, thanks to new subscribers. Getting up there. I'd like to have 300. I don't know, by the end of the year, maybe. I don't know. I'm up to like 243 now, maybe. So let's shoot for 300. That would be amazing. I want to do another subscriber shout out video or subscriber appreciation video where I kind of just, talk about some of the people who are most active on my channel and, shout you out and put links to your channels if you have one. I will do that soon. But tonight is more Hasbro WWF action figure reviews. We are up to Series 6, which is also from 1993. Series 5 was 1993, and Series 6 was the end of 1993. So we will talk about those. There are only... I reviewed Repo Man last time, so we're only talking about 5 figures. So it should be relatively quick, which would leave me time to talk about what is coming up. I gave you guys little spoilers or little, cliffhangers about something that is in my collection that is one of my most prized possessions, apostrophe, plural, not apostrophe, just plural. And I will tell you what that is tonight. The clue, again, is that somebody a while back asked me if I have any interest in WWF Coliseum videos or commercial releases that the WWE has put out. And I say a resounding no to that, because what I will talk about tonight allows me to not have a need for any of those commercial footage releases. And I want to do something special with that, and it's we're going to talk about some upcoming, an idea that I have for this channel that I think some of you, or all of you, classic WWF 1980s fans will really enjoy. I think. I'll put it out there. I'll see what you guys think. So, first, let's get to the Hasbro's Series 6, 1993. The year, I didn't mention this in my last video, but 1993 was a pretty epic year for the WWF. So think about what happened in 1993. Well, it was the beginning of the Monday Night Raw television show. Monday Night Raw replaced Primetime Wrestling, which is a show that I grew up watching. As Primetime Wrestling was a Monday night show for 2 hours on the USA Network that would highlight matches or show matches from all around the country, basically. And they had a studio. Initially, it was, Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan sitting at this really cool, announcer's desk, and they would show the matches, and they would have this amazingly wonderful historical banter back and forth between the two of them when they'd come back from matches. If you haven't seen Primetime Wrestling, go check it out. If you have seen it, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And from there, Vince McMahon took over the show, and he put it in front of an audience, and it kind of morphed into something completely different, and then it ended. But it transitioned right into Monday Night Raw. So obviously, Monday Night Raw has been on since 1993. I guess it is the longest cable show of all time. I think it's right behind The Simpsons for longest running show of currently or of all time. So that's pretty huge. But for me, I wasn't watching in 1993. I did not see any of the early Monday Night Raws. I haven't seen a lot of them. I was a WCW fan, so I was not even bothering with Monday Night Raw. And Monday Nitro had not started yet. So I was kind of just out of wrestling in 1993. But regardless, we've got the figures. Series 6, Hasbro. Let's take a look. Still kind of character transitions or weird cartoony, creations that the WWF was into at the time. Bringing back guys who had previous likenesses in the WWF and giving them completely new characters. The first of which is a wrestler that I grew up on. In fact, if you remember, I've talked about when I first got into wrestling in '84, there was a major feud going on in the WWF, and that was for the Intercontinental title. And that was between Greg Valentine and Tito Santana. So that was one of the first, big feuds that I watched as a kid. And I already reviewed the Greg Valentine figure, and now we're up to the Tito Santana figure. But it is not Tito Santana. He returned to the WWF and was repackaged as a Matador. Of course, they play on heritage and culture, as the WWF would do, and all of wrestling would do. And we've got Tito Santana, who is from Mexico. In fact, here's a little trivia. Tito Santana was advertised as being from Tocula, Mexico. Look it up. There is no such place as Tocula, Mexico. I believe there's a Toluca, Mexico, but there is no Tocula, Mexico. Anyway, since he was from Mexico, we may as well give him the best stereotype gimmick we can come up with. And so Tito Santana was brought back in 1993 for another payday and was repackaged as not the Matador, but El Matador. So here is the Tito Santana El Matador figure. Good looking figure. It's got that Jake the Snake body with that sort of weird punching arm motion. I do not mind this body type. I like it just fine. It's a good playable body type. The character, El Matador, again, payday for Tito Santana. Got him into a WrestleMania, but, he came to the ring with a very colorful outfit. Obviously, the Hasbro figure doesn't have it, but he had this really garish, sort of jacket robe type thing. And I don't remember if he came to the ring with an actual red, Olay thingy. I don't know if he did that or not. But Tito Santana did not have much success in his final run, the WWF, as El Matador, but he indeed did get a Hasbro figure. As always, when these guys would come back, they would get these vignettes that would boost them up and tell you that they were coming. And then they would get there and they would squash a few people on syndicated television shows and maybe get a few wins over some, mid-card guys. But then they would just become, whipping boys and would lose all the time. So Tito Santana was losing a lot as El Matador. Kind of passing the torch type thing, I suppose. I'm sure The Undertaker crushed him. I'm sure, guys that were coming up and becoming, more players in the WWF at the time would defeat guys like Tito Santana and Jimmy Snuka when they had their runs, their final runs. Next up, again, playing off cultural stuff. There has always been an Indian in the wrestling world. There's always been a Russian, and there's always been an Indian. Way back, we've got guys like Billy White Wolf. More from my generation of wrestlers, we had guys like Chief Jay Strongbow, Wahoo McDaniel. So the Indian character in wrestling was always something that you could rely on in less sensitive times. I don't think we have any Indian characters today. But, of course, we had one in 1993. He was Tatanka. And so this is the Tatanka Hasbro figure. Never a fan of this guy. Really didn't care for him much. And certainly not a fan of this particular Hasbro figure pose. I don't like this at all. It's kind of impossible to play. I guess you could bend his arms in that way. Makes it slightly more playable, but out here it's kind of a bad figure. But this is Tatanka in his 1993 Hasbro release. Break time. Okay, 1993 saw the creation of this character, John Nord. I started being aware of John Nord when he entered the American Wrestling Association, the AWA, in the very mid 80s, 1985 or so. And he was just a big, muscular dude from Minnesota, and was broken in by a lot of those sort of Minnesota guys that we've talked about, the Road Warriors. I guess all these guys kind of hung out at the same bar or gym or whatever. So, Nord the Barbarian, the Warlord, they were all buddies of the Road Warriors and all kind of worked out together. So John Nord was brought into the AWA. I believe for a while he was actually known as John Nord, and then he became Nord the Barbarian in the AWA. And from there, he finally got his shot on the big stage and came to the WWF in 92 or 93, and was not known as Nord anything, but rather was the Berserker. To this day, I have no idea what a Berserker is, but this is the John Nord Berserker character and his one and only Hasbro figure. Good figure. It's got the... in fact, this is molded exactly from a Hacksaw Jim Duggan figure. Hasbro did this a lot, where they just took bodies and put a different head on them and different paint job, and kind of ignored some of the subtle little details of the figure. For example, the Hacksaw Jim Duggan thumbs up comes, the Berserker figure comes complete with the Hacksaw Jim Duggan thumbs up pose. Again, just one of the many mid-card, over-the-top, gimmicky characters that were a part of the WWF roster at this time. Good-looking figure, fine-looking figure, decent play pose, comes complete with this sort of cloth, felty vest robe thing in his belt. So one of the more accessoried figures of the Hasbro line. This comes with actually two losable accessories, the cloth robe or vest and the belt that actually keeps it on. So kind of a hard figure to find complete because these things were often lost, but here we have John Nord, or Nord the Barbarian, or the Berserker in WWF. One of my I don't know, one of the strangest gimmicks in WWF, if you remember, was this character named Papa Shango, and he was I don't even know what to call him. Kind of voodoo. Was he dead? I mean, he had special spells. I don't know what you call that. I don't know where they were saying he was from other than parts unknown, but Papa Shango came to the WWF in 93 and started putting curses on everybody in his interviews. And one of the weirdest things I've ever seen was when Papa Shango and the Ultimate Warrior were feuding, and we had Papa Shango put some kind of weird spell on the Undertaker, and the Ultimate Warrior, and he vomited all this weird green gimmicky puke. I don't know. Papa Shango would go on to become Kama Mustafa in the Monday Night Raw era as part of the Nation of Domination. And then he would go on to become just Kama, who was this, or I think Kama was first, and then Kama Mustafa, and then the Godfather. from a little bit more modern era. But his first WWF character was Papa Shango. Great looking figure. Great play pose. Actually a good figure. It did have this skull and bones necklace that I do not have. So this figure is not complete. But nonetheless, it is a Papa Shango Hasbro Series 6 figure. Now, my favorite wrestler of all time, if you recall from previous videos, finally came to the WWF in about 1992, I want to say. Maybe late 91, early 92. And it was one of the most insane things that a young 80s revolution witnessed. Remember, we're talking about a time when wrestling organizations did not cross. They weren't acknowledged. So basically, the WWF would try to convince us or lead us to believe that no other wrestling organization existed on the planet, and that when guys came to the WWF, they were there for the first time, and you were not supposed to know who they were. And that's kind of the way that they did business for a long time. And then things started to morph a little bit in the early 90s. Things started to turn into the sports entertainment type of show that we have today. And one of my earliest memories of that morphing was when, out of the blue, one day, Bobby Heenan appeared on an episode of Wrestling Superstars and had in his hands the NWA World Heavyweight title, that big, beautiful gold belt. And when I saw that as a kid, that was one of the first, mind-blowing moments, it was one of the most mind-blowing moments as a wrestling fan. And it was starting to be, Bobby Heenan was teasing that the real world champion was on his way to the WWF. And of course, over in the NWA, Ric Flair was having contract negotiations with NWA, and he was leaving. So, of course, he's coming to the WWF as what has to be considered the biggest signing or the biggest jump in wrestling history, aside from, and then followed, I think, closely by Hulk Hogan jumping to WCW. But Ric Flair showing up in the WWF and quickly launching himself to the world's title. That's the only thing you could have done with Ric Flair. And I appreciate the WWF and Vince McMahon. They didn't change his name. They didn't change his gimmick. They didn't change anything about him at all. Nothing. And he was still allowed to be Ric Flair, the exact Ric Flair that I grew up watching. So then they made his Hasbro figure, and it's deplorable. I hate it. It's one of my least favorite figures of all time, because finally this guy that I, have just loved all these years comes to the WWF, gets a figure, and it's a horrible figure. Here is the Nature Boy Ric Flair WWF Hasbro figure. Terrible pose, terrible body type. They used the same exact figure for Rick Rude and for the 1-2-3 Kid. This is not a Ric Flair body type. And one of the worst of all, the face. It's a horrible face. This is just an overall horrible figure. I don't like it. The only thing I like about it is the RF on the boots and the trunks. They did okay with that. And I guess his hair is relatively Ric Flairish. Other than that, figure's junk. But one of the biggest moments for me as a wrestling fan was watching this all unfold and watching Ric Flair, somebody that had watched on Saturday nights on TBS since 1984, show up in the WWF. It was, surreal. WWF Ric Flair Hasbro release. Garbage figure. That's that for Series 6. That's that for 1993. We'll continue with Series 7 and beyond, and we will get back into the horror DVD, horror Blu-ray reviews. I started that, a couple weeks ago. We'll jump right back into that very soon. Really soon, actually. Probably my next video. But, so, here we go. What I want to do, all right, so basically, about 15 years ago, I started getting into what was called back then tape trading. And tape trading was basically how fans would, how we would have access to footage that was not otherwise available. Remember, 15 years ago, we were not talking about YouTube. We were not talking about WWE Network. We were not talking about even, what was that old, what did they do? WWE had some like classic on-demand, thing for a while. We didn't have that. So this footage was not available. But collectors who had been recording the footage from when it originally aired would get together in a community and trade. Well, I was a big part of that community, and there's an old website that I don't even know exists anymore called Crazy Max. And back in the day, I was a very often frequenter of Crazy Max. And for 15 years, I accumulated thousands and thousands of DVDs of wrestling footage. And when I say thousands and thousands, I mean it. I probably have about 8,000 DVDs, all loose in envelopes, or actually I'll show you my storage system. But so what does that mean? That means I have, when I say every, don't take me literally, but I won't talk about NWA and WCW right now because I have all that, but we're talking about WWF. I have pretty much every single episode of WWF Championship Wrestling, WWF Wrestling Superstars, WWF Wrestling Challenge, Primetime Wrestling, Tuesday Night Titans, Saturday Night's Main Event, and all of the pay-per-views and big events in between. Oh, house shows. I have pretty much most of the Madison Square Garden, Philadelphia Spectrum, Boston Garden, what's the one in Baltimore? I don't know. Can't remember. Baltimore Civic Center or something. I can't remember. House shows on DVD. My house shows start back in like 1976. But when they start going in order is about 1983. So from 1983 to 1992, I have massive collections of house shows. And I have them I collect them in years. So let's take 1994 or 1984, for example. I have everything 1984 from January to December. And I have them in order, which means if a WWF Championship Wrestling or a WWF All-American Wrestling episode aired on January 1st, I have that first. Then whatever aired after that, whether it was a house show, whether it was another syndicated TV show, whether it was a Saturday Night's Main Event, whatever, they're all in order. So basically, what I want to do with you guys is watch them and review them with you. And basically take you back and talk about, from a modern standpoint, I want to review a January 1st, 1984 episode of WWF Championship Wrestling. I want to talk to you about I will tell you all the matches. I'll run down the card. I will talk to you about storylines that were happening. I will talk to you about new wrestlers that were coming in, title changes, any kind of interesting tidbit about the episode. A lot of these have commercials intact. We'll talk about those. The LJN Wrestling Superstars commercial started airing for the first time. We'll talk about Tuesday Night Titans. What the heck was it? We'll have build-ups to WrestleMania. I'll talk to you about feuds that are happening, Piper's Pit episodes, and on and on and on. So I will dedicate an entire video to reviewing basically the year in wrestling as I watch it, and I will watch it in chronological order. So, for example, when Saturday Night's Main Event first happened in 1985, there was probably some build-up to it. And so probably on an episode of WWF Championship Wrestling or All-American Wrestling or Primetime Wrestling, they talked about this thing called Sorry guys, freaking camera cut out. Anyway, I'm going to review years of wrestling, complete years of WWF wrestling, 1984, starting with 1984, every single episode of every show that was on, including house shows, watching them and reviewing them with you guys, talking about all the fun stuff that happens in each year of wrestling. If you like the idea, it's coming soon. Let me know in the comments. Camera's probably going to die again. See you soon.